Joining us live from Adelaide is Centre Alliance Senator Rex Patrick and key crossbencher in this government. Rex Patrick, there you are. Welcome to the show. Can you tell us a bit about what you made of the Prime Minister's speech to the United Nations? He was defending Australia as not being laggards on climate change action.
Oh, good morning. Look, I'm a bit disappointed by this speech. It's not very inspiring in terms of any remedy to climate change. What it does do is spell out the need to make sure that we don't fill the oceans with plastic and make sure we recycle. And they're, of course, very good things, but it's not a climate change strategy, and that they shouldn't try and make out that it is.
So the government's been saying they're meeting their climate change targets, Paris commitments in a canter. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think we need to be doing more. Look, last night I spent some time reading the scientific evidence from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority in relation to their climate change issues paper. We do have a problem on our hands, and I don't think the government is taking it seriously enough. We need to do more.
Now, you've been quite vocal about appointments to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal after this story was reported in Crikey about the number of appointments that have come from former staffers. Now, they're arguing that 70% of the appointments made in the last few years by the government have been from former Liberal staffers, but it's still quite a small proportion of the actual number of AAT judges that have connections to the Liberal Party.
Well, that's no comfort to people who turn up to the AAT when an adverse decision has been made against them and they find themselves with a senior member hearing their case, and that senior member doesn't have the requisite qualifications that you would normally expect someone who is dealing with some form of merit review or legal matter, and that is the fundamental problem. It's not something I've just raised. I tried to get an inquiry up in November last year to try and look at how these appointments were made, and indeed High Court Justice Callanan did a report into this, and I tried to move a motion in the Senate just recently to take up his recommendation, which basically says it's a very sensible recommendation: do not appoint people to the AAT who do not have legal qualifications, the exception being accountants for matters that involve intricate accounting issues.
Isn't that the nature of these tribunals, though, is that they're not necessarily supposed to be staffed with legal professionals?
No, in general, people that appear before the AAT are dealing with issues that involve a combination of merit and legal arguments. So they are what are called merit reviews, but there is definitely legal interpretation that takes place, and so you do need legal expertise. In fact, it's the fundamental requirement in the Act. There is a dispensation where the Governor-General, and of course that's always on the advice of the Attorney, can appoint someone who has other experience, but there's no question the Act, the intent of the Parliament was to have people who had legal qualification.
So what would you like to see the government do on this?
Well, I think we need to re-look at the way in which appointments are made. Right now, it's simply on the recommendation of the Attorney-General. There's almost no scrutiny to that at all until after someone has been appointed. It shouldn't be that you get an appointment to what is often more than a $300,000 per annum job simply because you were a former staffer of a minister or that you were a former politician. These are serious tribunals. They are the first place that people can go to when they need to deal with an adverse government decision, and people have an entitlement to have someone that they're appearing before with the right qualifications.
Do you feel passionately enough about this that you would consider engaging in a bit of horse trading with the government for support on other bills to see that happen?
Well, all throughout my parliamentary term, I will always be pressing issues that are of concern to me. As I said, I have already attempted to run an inquiry into this. It's interesting that Mark Dreyfus came out on Sky and suggested that he has a problem with it, yet Labor didn't support my inquiry into this, and maybe I now need to go back around the buoy with Mark Dreyfus on board to get the numbers to look at this properly and look at the proper remedies.
When it comes to these cannabis laws in ACT, there is some question about the conflict with the Commonwealth laws. Would you support decriminalisation of cannabis at a federal level?
Look, I think there is a problem when you do have these sorts of conflicts. My view on this is that it requires analysis from both a medical perspective and a law enforcement perspective, looking at the pros and cons. So it's not something I would simply jump straight on top of and say yes or no. It requires considerable thought.
So you don't necessarily support the decriminalisation of cannabis?
Look, my gut position would be no, because whilst I support the use of medicinal cannabis, I think most drugs in general cause harm, but always open to have a look at these things. That's if legislation was put up, I'm sure it would be put to a Senate inquiry where we could get the right sort of experts before senators to be able to make a proper judgment.
If we can just turn back to Scott Morrison's trip to the United States, it's been very eventful for a few weeks, and and he's had a very successful time in building his relationship with Donald Trump. But do you think he stepped a bit too far reprimanding China over their place in the World Trade Organization and their status as a developing country? Should that have been better put in Australia?
Well, as you well know, I've been calling for a broad inquiry into our relationship with China, because I think there are a whole bunch of issues that need to be looked at in a calm and considered manner. Unfortunately, I cannot get Labor support or Liberal support to conduct that sort of inquiry, which could deal with all sorts of issues ranging from climate change strategies through to how we engage in terms of Belt and Road, to how we engage on a strategic level from a defence perspective, to looking at how we engage people to people, university to university, and simply we have a parliament that's unwilling to engage in that sort of examination. And so then we end up with a situation where we approach these things with what appears to be little strategy, and that's unfortunate.
Why don't you think the government and Labor have been supportive of you in that push?
Well, I don't understand why. There's some fear of invoking an inquiry into China, thinking that somehow it would upset our relationship. An inquiry that looks at China doesn't have to be a bad thing. It looks at all the positives, and of course it's going to look at the places where we need to show a bit of caution, but it should be viewed as a positive thing, and I simply do not understand why, when I know the people of Australia will be interested in this relationship. It is not going away. It is the elephant in the room. Every day, a new story appears on China, whether it's to do with Labor donations at ICAC, whether it's Gladys Liu, whether it's climate change. Every day something is turning up, and we simply are putting our heads in the sand. We need to look at this strategically.
So you support the idea that China's no longer a developing nation?
Well, I've been to both Shanghai and I've been to Beijing, and I would argue that they are past the stage of a developing nation. They are an economic powerhouse, the second largest economy in the world. They are expanding their military reach. In respect of what the Prime Minister has said, I actually agree with him.
Senator Rex Patrick, live there from Adelaide. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.